The 2022 November midterms ended recently, but they're not fully over yet. There is one critical race that remains to be resolved, and that is the Georgia Senate race. Now, in the states of Georgia and Louisiana, they have a rule called the 50% rule, which says that if neither candidate gets at least 50% of the vote, then it goes to a runoff election between the top two candidates to determine the winner of that election. Now, in the Georgia Senate election that occurred in November, like the rest of the midterm elections, Raphael Warnock gained more votes than Herschel Walker. However, neither candidate got a majority of votes. Neither candidate got more than 50% of votes. As a result, there will be the final runoff election on December 6th, 2022. This election will decide who will have the Georgia Senate seat for the next 6 years. Now, the two candidates are, of course, the current Democratic senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock, a former priest at a church in Atlanta, and former football player Herschel Walker, who is the Republican candidate that is challenging Senator Warnock. Now, I'm going to go through some of the policy positions and specific stances on issues of the two candidates. And I will do this objectively and with as little bias as possible and go over those policy positions. And after reviewing those policy positions of the various candidates, I will give you my analysis and my opinion as to who I think is the better choice to fill that Senate seat. So, on the issue of the minimum wage, Senator Raphael Warnock supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25. It's been that for over a decade now, and Warnock supports raising that to $15 an hour. Herschel Walker opposes raising the minimum wage at all. In fact, in a debate with Warnock, Herschel Walker implied that he supported abolishing the minimum wage entirely. In regards to Medicaid expansion, so Medicaid is a program that provides health care for low-income individuals in the United States. And in 12 states of the country, there is a gap of coverage in which people who normally would have an income low enough to qualify for Medicaid don't because of gaps in coverage in those states. So Raphael Warnock wants the state of Georgia to expand Medicaid to fill that gap. And he also wants the federal government to expand Medicaid nationwide across all 50 states to cover that gap in the remaining 12 states that have not done that. Now, Herschel Walker opposes this because he says it's too expensive. Regarding climate change, Raphael Warnock supported the $370 billion in investments to combat climate change that were in the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's already been passed. And that was supported by Raphael Warnock. That was opposed by Herschel Walker because Walker believes that climate change is not a top priority and that spending that much money on it is a waste of money. In regards to the Affordable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act, which was signed by the Obama administration, was enhanced and expanded by the Biden administration in 2021. However, those enhanced benefits or that enhanced version of the ACA was set to expire. So they had a bill to extend that for 3 more years, and that was passed and signed. So Raphael Warnock supported that 3-year extension of Obamacare, and Herschel Walker is against extending that for 3 years. Now, in regards to corporate taxation, recently the Biden administration signed into law a 15% minimum corporate tax. Now, basically, there's a lot of gigantic corporations and companies that would normally pay a very high tax rate, but because of deductions and other loopholes and other things like that, they end up paying very low taxes, sometimes basically 0% in corporate income taxes. And so what this bill did is it said that if your deductions take you under 15% of your income, then it's 15% automatically. You can't go below that. This is not in general. This is just for companies that make over a certain amount of money, only very large companies. For those very large companies, they have to pay, no matter what, at least 15% of their income, if not more. But if their deductions take them below that, they have to pay at least 15%. That was supported by Raphael Warnock. It is opposed by Herschel Walker. Now, in regards to drug prices, Raphael Warnock supported and voted for the provision to cap out-of-pocket costs for Medicare for prescription drug prices to $2,000 a year. Now, this takes effect in 2025, and basically it means that for someone with Medicare, they will not pay more than $2,000 out of pocket for prescription drugs. This is supported by Raphael Warnock, and this is opposed by Herschel Walker. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement is a movement that is supported by Raphael Warnock quite passionately and opposed by Herschel Walker. And then in the issue of gun control, Raphael Warnock is a supporter and advocate for the policy of universal background checks at the federal level. So universal background checks at the federal level is supported by Raphael Warnock. However, Herschel Walker is against universal background checks. And he said that he criticized Warnock for supporting universal background checks because Walker said that it was unconstitutional and not consistent with the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Now I will give my personal analysis and opinion. Now, in my opinion, on all these 8 policy issues, I think Raphael Warnock has the correct position. If you go down the list, when it comes to the minimum wage, I mean, people talk about, this part is my opinion for the rest of the video, by the way. People talk about the minimum wage being the same since about 2009, but actually, even though it's been $7.25, the actual value of that has declined because of inflation. So since 2009, the minimum wage has lost 20% of its value because $7.25 in 2009 is more than $7.25 in 2016, which is more than $7.25 now. So, I mean, if you do nothing and you don't raise the minimum wage at all, like what Walker supports, then you're effectively decreasing it because inflation cuts its value over time. I mean, when it comes to Medicaid expansion on top of that, I mean, healthcare is extremely important, especially at a time when costs are rising. And $370 billion in climate change investments is the most significant investment to combat climate change in American history, period. I mean, it's a historic investment and it's a historic decision, and it will cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. That is very substantial. $370 billion investment. That goes into tax credits, very substantial tax credits for electric vehicles, very substantial increases in investments for wind energy and for solar energy. A very substantial allocation of funds to the Department of Agriculture to be invested in more sustainable agricultural practices. So that's for farming that is far more environmentally sustainable. And not only will this significantly contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change, which is a global crisis, but it has also been shown, according to an analysis by the Labor Energy Partnership, that the Inflation Reduction Act will create 1.5 million jobs by the year 2030. 1.5 million jobs by the year 2030 from the climate provisions alone of the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are jobs in manufacturing, those are jobs in services, those are jobs in construction, all related to the massive investments taking place due to these $370 billion of climate investments. In regards to the Affordable Care Act extension, with Herschel Walker opposing the extension of the ACA subsidies. In my personal opinion, I think the U.S. should have a single-payer healthcare system that guarantees universal healthcare. That's a system that is not supported. It's also called Medicare for All. That is not supported by Raphael Warnock or Herschel Walker. They're both opposed to Medicare for All. But this ACA extension is extremely important. And that ACA extension that Walker opposes and that Raphael Warnock voted for saved 3 million people from getting kicked off their health insurance, because a study by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that if that was not extended, 3 million people would have lost their health insurance. So that right there, 3 million people, that's a gigantic number of people that would have lost access to health care that did not lose their access because of that act. In regards to 15% corporate minimum tax, I mean, 15% is less than what most individual people pay. Like the average person pays a higher tax rate than 15%. And this is just like the bare minimum. And this only applies to gigantic, large corporations. In regards to the $2,000 price cap, I mean, capping the price of $2,000 for out-of-pocket costs, which takes place in 2025 for Medicare, that helps 1.4 million people, because there were 1.4 million people in 2020 that paid more than that for Medicare out-of-pocket prescription drugs. And that's a conservative estimate. That's a low estimate because every few years the number of people who pay that go up because costs go up. So over the long run, this will help way more than 1.4 million people per year. But the low estimate is at least 1.4 million people on Medicare will be benefiting from this $2,000 price cap. When it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it's extremely important. I don't really know why Herschel Walker opposes it. I saw a tweet by him where he explains his position against it. I don't think it was a very intellectually well-developed tweet. He said that Black Lives Matter was attacking the United States and that Black Lives Matter is like a Marxist plot or whatever. I don't think there's much like credibility to those arguments. And universal background checks, which is a very, very basic, very, very mild. I mean, this is not. I'm not talking about banning guns. I'm not talking about like the types of gun laws that exist in Japan or many other Japan, Australia, those kinds of countries have way more strict gun laws than what people like Raphael Warnock are proposing. I mean, this issue of universal background checks, supported by Raphael Warnock and opposed by Herschel Walker, all it says is that for a gun to be purchased legally, there has to be a background check. A lot of people assume that that's already the case. That's not already the case. There are massive legal loopholes that are significant that allow someone to get a gun without a background check. Not on the black market, but in legal ways at gun shows, online gun sales, etc. I mean, it's estimated that about 20% of legal gun sales in the US are done without a background check. And that is extremely dangerous. I mean, universal background checks is a basic policy, a very basic policy, a very mild policy. I mean, polls show that over 90% of the American people are in favor of these universal background checks. That's supported by Raphael Warnock and opposed by Herschel Walker. In summary, all those 8 policy positions that I listed, in my opinion, Raphael Warnock has the correct position. And a lot of Herschel Walker's objections to these positions have to do with the cost of the policies, but almost pretty much, if you look at the policies I listed, Medicaid expansion has not been implemented yet, but the $370 billion in climate change investments, the ACA extension, the $2,000 price cap, those 3 provisions that have been passed, that Warnock supports, that Walker opposes, all of those are paid for. They're paid for with stuff like the 15% corporate minimum tax, which raises revenue. That's opposed by Herschel Walker. And here's the thing, Herschel Walker's party, the Republican Party, in 2017, they passed a tax cut for approximately $2 trillion that overwhelmingly benefited the extremely wealthy and the extremely high income and massively cut corporate taxes. So they're willing to spend money when it comes to cutting taxes for corporations, but when it comes to extending the Affordable Care Act to save 3 million people from losing their health insurance, then they're suddenly concerned about costs and the deficit. And this is stuff that is paid for by the 15% corporate minimum tax. So in conclusion, I think that Raphael Warnock is a much better candidate for the United States Senate than Herschel Walker. And that is, I mean, complete just on policy positions, not even getting into the personal scandals surrounding Herschel Walker, like the fact that, like, on his taxes, he lists his residence not as Georgia, but as Texas, so that he can benefit from lower tax rates for the wealthy in Texas. So that's another reason that you could say for opposing Herschel Walker. In my opinion, from a strategic perspective, the Republican Party made a mistake in nominating Herschel Walker. I think the Republican Party could have easily won that Senate race if they had chosen a more moderate candidate or a more qualified candidate. So, for example, Brian Kemp, the gubernatorial candidate, in my opinion, I still think Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, would have been a better governor for Georgia. However, from a strategic perspective, Brian Kemp is a very good candidate in terms of his ability to win elections and electoral effectiveness. So that will probably be one of the many things that could contribute to the Republican Party splitting over Donald Trump. The fact that Donald Trump endorsed a lot of candidates like Herschel Walker that may end up losing the Senate race, Maybe, maybe not. It remains to be seen. But even if he does win, it'll be by a much smaller margin than Brian Kemp won over Stacey Abrams. In conclusion, because Raphael Warnock supports raising the minimum wage, expanding healthcare, fighting climate change, 15% corporate minimum tax, all these things that I listed. In conclusion, I think that Raphael Warnock should win, and I believe that he is the much better candidate for the Georgia Senate race, which is occurring on December 6th, 2022. If you found this video informative and important, I would please encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you can see future informational content. Thank you.